Don't share any secrets as of right now.
There's 10 sessions a week, so 4 sessions Monday, there's some really serious kids that are juniors. 300 top
We have microphones.
Hold on, I put down my paper somewhere.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you for coming. Clap them.
Okay, are we ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Is Facebook with us?
Facebook is with us.
Excellent.
You are live.
Let's go in. All right. Ooh, hello. Hello. It's working. There we go. I was going to say it's working on it. It takes a minute to warm up. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Welcome to Triton Booksellers and Cafe. Thank you for supporting local businesses. And we usually say local authors, but we have one local author, and the other two can be honorary local authors. If you like what you see here tonight, we have events going on almost every night of the week. I'm going to highlight just a couple that are upcoming here. Tomorrow we have historian Sarah Prager talking about her new book, Queer, There, and Everywhere, which is all about LGBTQ people in history. She's fantastic. It's a great Pride Month event. It is free and open to everyone. On Thursday, another great Pride Month event, we have speed dating for queer women. If that is a category you fall into and would like to have a meet cute at a bookstore, I would encourage you to come. And on Monday, we have Writing Hard Stories, which is a panel presented in cooperation with Grub Street. And it is 4 different memoirists talking about writing difficult stories from their past and the art of writing a compelling memoir. So if any of those sound interesting to you, we'd love to have you join us. We also have bar trivia every Friday at 8:30, which is always free and always open to the public. And you can come and win prizes and fame and glory. Your server tonight is Gabe, who is currently handing out drinks in the back. Please clap for Gabe. Applause is great, but it doesn't pay his rent, so please tip Gabe well tonight. And if at any point during the event you feel like you need food or drink, please feel free to go up to the bar and order with either Gabe or me. The bar and the kitchen are open till midnight, so please make use of that. And now, without further ado, I'm going to give you quick intros on these fantastic people that I'm like standing uncomfortably close to. I'm so sorry. And then I'm going to turn the night over to them. So first we have Brad Stulberg. Brad is a columnist for Outside Magazine and New York Magazine, and has also written for Forbes, NPR, the Los Angeles Times, Runner's World, and the Huffington Post. Previously, he worked as a consultant for McKinsey & Company, where he counseled some of the world's top executives on a broad range of issues. An avid athlete and outdoor enthusiast, he lives in Northern California with his wife and their 2 cats. Also with us tonight is Steve Magness. He is a coach to some of the top distance runners in the world, and has coached numerous athletes to impressive performances at the World Championships and Olympic Games. He currently coaches at the University of Houston and serves as an adjunct professor of strength and conditioning at St. Mary's University. He has been a featured expert in Runner's World, the New York Times, the New Yorker, the BBC, the Wall Street Journal, and ESPN. His first book, The Science of Running, was published in 2014. And tonight, joining them and graciously moderating this fantastic discussion is Amy Cuddy. Amy is known around the world for her 2012 TED Talk, which is the 2nd most viewed TED Talk in history. But you're coming for number 1, right? We're going to fight it. Throw down. TED Talk throwdown. A Harvard Business School professor and social psychologist, she studies how nonverbal behavior and snap judgments influence people. Her research has been published in top academic journals and covered by NPR, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, The Economist, Wired, Fast Company, and more. She has been named a game changer by Time, a rising star by the Association for Psychological Science, one of 50 women who are changing the world by Business Insider, and a young global leader by the World Economic Forum. So clearly we have really small and unimpressive people with us tonight. Please join me in welcoming Brad, Steve, and Amy.
And I'm so glad to meet you guys in person. So we became Twitter friends over the last couple of years. So this is the first time we're actually meeting, not on the phone or on Twitter, through direct messaging. So I'm going to start with a a question actually that my husband Paul came up with, and I thought it was so great. So most of you have not yet read their book, but they talk about their paths and how they changed paths from these being sort of very intense and focused and sort of goal focused to burning out, and you kind of met through this experience of burnout. I'm not sure that I saw your experience as a burnout experience, and we'll get to that later, because I think just defining what burnout is interesting. But I wonder, I mean, there's a lot of questions in this, but what would your teenage, actually, let me quickly tell you their story, very quickly. So you were at McKinsey working hard. It's a pretty intense job. You then were at the White House in what, 2010?
Right after the Accountable Care Act was passed. So,
Okay.
yes,
All
2010.
right. And Steve, you were an incredibly fast runner in high school, and I'm sure you're still an incredibly fast runner, but you had a peak in high school and felt, I'm going to let you just describe that briefly, because there's a sort of Prefontaine classic moment, and I'm going to let you describe this, because to me you're still an incredibly fast runner, so it's even hard for me to interpret it as burning out.
You're bringing back deep wounds here. This is going to get emotional. Basically, quick story is, in high school I ran a 401 mile, which at that time was, I think, 6th fastest high schooler ever, and the fastest in the country for that year, 2030. So I ran the pre-classic, which is the Prefontaine Classic, which is basically the best professional track and field meet in the country. So I lined up against guys who were winning Olympics and Olympic medals and got dusted, but I still ran 401. So at that point I thought, all right, I'm on top of the world, like I'm going to go to the Olympics, and my mile PR is still 401. So I didn't improve. 18-year-old me could beat me now, but that's okay.
All right, okay. So you talk about burning out and meeting each other and having a sort of two-person support group, but like now you've written this book, you've written other books, you're doing pretty amazing things, and here's the question that my husband wanted to ask. What would your teenage selves think of yourselves now?
This is probably embarrassing to say, but teenage me would probably see me as a failure. And the reason for that is simple. Is that at that point in my life, all that mattered, all that was focused on was running. Like, that was all that mattered. Like, I didn't care what was going on in school. Like, people would ask me, oh, like, where are you going to college? I'm like, well, wherever I think I can run fast enough. Like, academics didn't matter at all. They'd ask me, you know, what are you going to major in? I had no idea. I didn't care. You know, I like to put it this way, is like, because now people think I'm smart for some reason. But at that point, like, all my friends and even my parents were surprised at graduation when I, like, stood up and was in the top 10% of the school. Because, like, I didn't do any homework or anything. I didn't care. So having that understanding, like, high school me would be like, oh my gosh, you didn't run faster? Like, you failed. You know, so I guess that would be my roundabout answer to do that. And I think the lesson out of that is, like, the perspective that sometimes we don't have and sometimes need to find some way.
So it is a good question. I think that me back then would say that I am successful now, and like being up here on this stage with Steve and Amy and having a book. But I think me back then would say that I was successful for different reasons than I currently define success. So I think back then it would be a lot more about having a name on a book and less about being able to write and spend most of my time doing something that I genuinely enjoy.
So it would still be about performance in a way.
Yeah.
Right? You said having your name in a book. So here's what I'm wondering. When I read your stories, I thought, oh, they found their sense of purpose. Right? So I didn't see it as a failure. I saw it as a shift in how you saw your lives and what you wanted to be spending your time doing. And maybe there's a little bit of chaos and this sort of slack a little bit in between. I just wonder how much do you still interpret that as burnout as opposed to going, all right, I can't do that thing forever, and maybe it's because it doesn't sustain me.
Yes and no. It's like, so I think that on the one hand, I would still say that I was pretty burnt out. Like I was having physical symptoms, right? Like hands and feet always cold, like not being able to sleep, really like grinding just too hard physically at that point. So I think that I would still consider burnout. From a motivational standpoint, I don't necessarily think I hit like a true lull. So to Amy's point, I do think there was a shift in what I wanted to do. And maybe we'll get into this later, but some of the more interesting research that we came across, and some of which is included in the book, is around oftentimes people hear burnout and they think sleep more, exercise, have like work-life balance, and all of those structural elements are important, but the sense of finding meaning in what you're doing and having purpose is often one of like the best antidotes to burnout that there is.
Yeah, I would agree in a lot of ways. I mean, I think I had a lot of physical symptoms of burnout. I mean, I was, as a 19-year-old, running like 120 miles a week, and just my body was just toast. Like my immune system was just in the tank. But I think in a lot of ways, like the physical symptoms were there, but the psychological, almost emotional, mental was more of what you were talking about. It's like the drive and stuff never like wavered that much. It just had to find its place where I could apply it to something that probably better fit like my physical, mental, psychological balance that I could sustain and move forward with.
I'm going to come back to purpose, because it does sort of come full circle in a way, doesn't it?
Yes.
Okay. All right. There's so much. All right. Can I just ask how many people in this group are like pretty serious athletes in some way? How many people are big beginner athletes? Okay. You're lying. You're not. What wisdom? I mean, okay. When I see a book like this, I mean, I know about the two of you, and I know how seriously you take psychology and caring for yourself, and so I'm not scared off because I know enough about YouTube. But if I saw the book, I might feel like as a beginning runner, this is not for me. I'm never going to be a peak performer, and I mean, we can get into what does peak performance mean.
Yeah.
But I'm just running because I kind of enjoy trail running, and my husband actually is a good runner. And how is this a book for beginners as well? Like, how does a beginner apply some of what you write about?
So I think that it's a book that hopefully, if we did our job well, extends pretty far beyond just athletics. So even though you might be a beginner in sport, if there is an area of your life where perhaps you're more traditionally, I guess we can talk about how we define performance, but performance driven, a lot of the research and insights from the book should apply to that. And when we report it out, the balance might be a slight majority of athletes, simply because of who Steve works with and might get outside, but we also spoke with entrepreneurs, artists, a mathematician, so it covers a wide range of domains. Even so, I would say that the athletic pearls and insights that are included in the book, I think that they could help anyone at any level that's trying to get the most out of themselves and sustain. So even if you're a beginning runner, I'd almost argue, and Steve can probably go into more detail of it, like in a way being a beginning runner is far more dangerous than being an elite runner, because there are so many ways that you can go wrong.
Yeah, just briefly, I completely agree with that. Because like, if you're trying to achieve peak performance in running, for example, you've likely gone through high school, college, all this stuff, and you've learned all these different lessons and had these lessons ingrained to you either by coaches or experience. Most of the time, for the rest of us who take up a sport or a job or athletics or whatever it is, and we're beginning at it, we don't have those lessons involved. So we spend a lot of time heading in the wrong direction, and the consequences, I think, are higher if you go that route. So hopefully from our book, it's not only about achieving like the best in the world, it's achieving like what you see as your best given your constraints in that moment.
Tell us about stress a bit, and is stress bad? I know there are new discussions about stress and how it can be harnessed, but it's still confusing because I think a lot of we hear about stress-related illness. A lot of the sort of Western ideas of increasing well-being and sort of happiness are around reducing stress. Right? So how do you see stress? How is it related to peak performance? And how do you do it without burning out?
Sure. So what we found in both research and the practical experience working with people is that there's two things. Is one, that how you frame stress matters. So there's a lot of really good recent research that shows that if you see it as a negative or you see it almost as a positive that is a challenge to adapt to, is that soul framing will shift how your body responds and adapts to it. That's looking at things from health, and that's also looking at things from a workout standpoint. If I go into a workout and I think, oh, this is going to be really hard and this is not going to be fun and this is going to leave me in the bed for the next day, like my actual physical adaptations are going to be worse than if I went in with a good attitude on it. And I think the other part of it is seeing stress as something you can adapt to, which Brad, you want to talk about?
Sure. So the first section of the book we call the growth equation, and we say stress plus rest equals growth. And the kind of stress that we refer to in that is not, I guess, how a traditional like Western definition of stress, so an argument with a spouse or a boss making you anxious, but more so a stimulus. So something that will arouse you and push you to a place where you're uncomfortable. The example that I love to use is quite simple. It's how would you make your bicep muscle grow? So if you were to pick up a weight that is way too heavy, odds are like you'd throw out your back or you'd rip your bicep tendon, you'd injure yourself, or you just wouldn't be able to do it, so you screw this, like I'm done. If you pick up a weight that is extremely light, like a 1 pound weight, you can sit there and lift it all day and your bicep wouldn't adapt. So in order to make your bicep muscle grow, you want to find a weight that is stressful enough, so maybe you come close to the point of failure, or occasionally you even fail, but not so heavy that you can't do it. And even when you find that weight, if you just sit there and curl with your bicep all day, eventually like your arm will quite literally burn out and you won't be able to do it anymore. So in exercise science, it's called progressive overload, which is the notion that you apply a stressor to a system that you want to grow, and then you follow that up with rest and recovery, and it's during the rest and recovery that system grows and gains the capacity to take on more future stress. What was fascinating in the research and reporting for the book is we learned that a very similar equation can apply to creative growth, I guess I'd call it, and particularly creative insight, as well as emotional growth and the ability to, I guess, stick in it or stay in it in tricky situations, and also willpower. So that is a stress that is a challenge, it's a stimulus, it might be something really hard. It's not domestic violence or a stress that you can't control. I'm not an expert in that field. From my background in public health, I know that there's a lot of research that stress that you cannot control tends to be quite harmful, regardless of how you see it.
You talk a lot about rest in the book, and sort of I think you call it the rest paradox, or the paradox of rest. Yeah. All right, so for people who are kind of high performers, whether it's in sport or not, you've got these peak moments, whether you expected to have them or not. And then there's a kind of regression to the mean, right, which is inevitable. But also there's an intentional rest that you need to take. Like you need to rest between these peaks. How do you not lose your confidence and your kind of identity during those rest periods when you can't? You're on a sort of the downward slope. How do you do that? I mean, I think that's really hard for a lot of us to not feel that life is this upward trajectory, and you have to continue to outdo yourself. And there can be nothing in between. It can't even be this. It's got to be this.
So I'll take it real quickly, then I'll hand it to Steve. So again, to use an example from athletics, it is so typical that a marathon runner will have done all this training, and then leading into the race, you want to do something that's called taper, where you drastically decrease your training to let your body adapt to it and to hopefully get fresh so you feel good on race day. The number one mistake that amateur athletes make is a couple days before the race, they lose confidence and they're like, oh, I haven't run hard in 2 weeks. And they go out and do a really hard workout to prove to themselves that they're fit. And then they nail the workout, but 3 days later, they've left the race in the workout. So in the book, we talk about having the courage to rest, and I'm going to hand it over to Steve because he's working with some of the fastest runners in the world who have had to really learn how to rest. Otherwise, they wouldn't have careers in what they do.
Yeah, so actually it's kind of funny. Working hard, especially if you're driven and motivated, isn't that difficult. So putting in the work it isn't a challenge for, let's say, a world-class runner, or even someone who's driven to be the fastest they can. As a coach, my job most of the time is actually to pull in the reins. So I'm always the person saying, hey, let's not do that, or let's just do a little bit less. And you would think it would be the opposite, where I'd be like, the slave driver trying to get them to do more and more and more. But what you see is that driven people really want to work hard, and if you let them go, they'll eventually, not adapt, burn out, all that good stuff, or just see their performances drop. But, when I explain this concept to my athletes, what I say is, during the rest is when you get better. So whether you're looking at physical times, you don't get better during the actual workout, right? The workout, you actually get a little worse because your body breaks down, you create fatigue byproducts, all that stuff. It's actually during the times in between where your body starts releasing hormones to start building things up, you increase protein in the muscles, you get stronger, and your body goes, okay, we got to be prepared for this next time. And the interesting thing is, whether it's your body or your mind, the same thing occurs. So for instance, a lot of learning occurs when we're going to sleep, right? A lot of physical recovery comes when we go to sleep and we get hits of HGH and testosterone and other nice hormones like in the middle of our sleep. So it's during that time in between where we need to really step back and just allow our body to go through that process so that next time when we hit it hard, whether physically or mentally, we can go deep again.
So one more quick example that is outside of sport, but I think so true, is a writer. The hardest thing that I do is when I'm working on something with a deadline that is maybe midday next day, and I haven't finished it, is to step away from the screen and go to bed. Yet, if I sit in front of the screen, I inevitably end up either having a crappy article or rewriting whatever I wrote the next morning. Whereas if I just say, for me it's, 7 p.m., my mind just starts to not function very well. So I have to really have the courage to all right, this story is not done. Oftentimes, maybe I need to think of a closing, or I need to write the lead. So the creative work of it is not done, and it's due the next day at noon, let's say. Again, the impulse is to sit there and stare at the screen and plug away, but what the research shows, and then what my own experience in writers far better than me that we spoke with, what they say is go to sleep, because that's when your brain literally has your subconscious mind turns on, you synthesize what you were working on, and then you wake up the next morning, and it's an entirely different experience writing. So different domains, but I think a pretty good parallel.
Are there, I as a professor at a pretty intense place, pretty intense students, faculty are pretty intense, there are a lot of people who feel, a lot of us feel, that we can do all-nighters, that we're able to, like we're different in some way and it doesn't hurt us. I don't mean that we're better, but we're somehow able to do that, it doesn't hurt at all. Do you feel like there are individual differences in how much people, so one of the common stories I hear are people who can sort of put it off till the end because they've got a million other things to do, and then they can totally crank it out in 12 hours and do their best work. Do you see that? I mean, do you feel like that's a fiction? Is that what we tell ourselves? Or are there people who are like that?
I think we have a great ability to delude ourselves. And I think that happens in multiple cases. Most of the time what happens is we tell ourselves a story and justify whatever behavior we're going to do. So I can sit there and say like, oh yeah, I'm great at, I can stay up, I can cram, and this is going to be the best that I can do. But research consistently shows that it doesn't work that well. Using another example is everyone thinks they can multitask, right? But if you look at numerous research studies, it's something like 98 to 99% of people can't multitask, right? Including when they put them in an fMRI, look at attention switches and stuff like that, there's like 1 to 2% of people who can. Now, you can roll the dice and think that you're special, or you can, and maybe you are, I'm not discounting that, or you can, say like, most likely I'm not the exception.
Yeah, I would agree. I guess the only thing that I'd add is I think that there's a difference between working in ways that the research shows is not productive in deluding yourself to thriving under pressure. So I do think that some people thrive under pressure, and a deadline or a key event that they're working towards can actually be a spark. And that may very well be true, but I would still try to set up the pressure situation so you're somewhat well rested. That's the first thing I'd say. And then the second thing is there's a difference between eking out a night or even a week. I mean, this 3-day stretch for us, we're traveling, we're not practicing what we preach sleep movement-wise at all. And I think we'll be okay, it's 3 days. But to try to build a long-term progression like that, I don't think is sustainable, and the evidence supports that.
So one of my collaborators who's here, who is a pretty serious athlete, was saying that he sometimes feels like when he would feel like when he won, I guess you're talking rowing, maybe, that you felt more after all this training that winning was more of a relief. So basically a decrease in negativity as opposed to an increase in positivity. Do you see that? How do you buffer against that? I mean, is that a common, I guess Steve in particular, you probably, as a coach.
Yeah, you see that a lot. It becomes this, instead, everyone thinks like, oh, when I win, it's going to feel amazing, it's going to be this joyous opportunity. But a lot of times what happens is that people it's like a relief that I did not fail. And what you see with those types of people, those types of athletes, is that their framing of what they're doing is often wrong. Like what you do as a coach is look at what is their underlying motivation. And then inevitably, those people have a fear of failure that is driven by some perceived pressure. Whether it's internal pressure or external pressure from, if I don't do this, my parents won't like me, or, I'm going to lose my scholarship or something like that. Like, you see that a lot, and people will create the craziest stories where they will think that, their life is going to be ruined if they don't win this, stupid local 5K race, right? And, to combat that, I always like using the story of one of my good friends, Phoebe Wright, who was she was 4th at the Olympic trials one year in the 800, so just missed making the Olympic team. And I asked her, how do you deal with the pressure of trying to make an Olympic team and trying to, compete and on a world stage? And she told me, well, when I step out on the track and I start to get nervous and I see all these people and see the TV cameras and realize, oh my gosh, I've been training for this for 4 years, she thinks, in the end, does really anybody give a shit about track and field? And specifically me? And she's not being negative. What she's doing is reframing it. Because she's saying, none of the external stuff matters. All that matters is that I take care of my process and do what I need to and execute what I'm trying to do. And if I do that, I can walk away saying, like, I did everything I can, I gave it my all, and the result is the result.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I'd agree with what Steve said. I guess it's just focusing on the process versus the outcome of something. And it's really easy to say, just focus on the process, don't worry about the outcome. But I think that unless like you really have this Zen kind of mystique that you've developed through practice, it's not realistic. Like, I want this book to do well. That's like, we're selling this book. Of course I want it to do well. But if my primary motivation was book sales, then I become extremely fragile. Because what if the book doesn't do well? What if the book doesn't do well because of an event that I can't control happens externally and people aren't buying? Like, there's so many factors, and I think that if you frame success or failure around an outcome, you make yourself fragile. So it's not to say, like, I wouldn't tell people in most situations not to be concerned with outcomes. I think it's just important to try to continue to tell yourself a story where maybe the outcome is 30% of your drive and motivation, but the other 70% is more intrinsic.
So, I mean, changing mindset is not easy, and it's just not easy. We could read many, many books about changing mindset. But one of the things I'm wondering about, sort of in that vein, is how you think about winning and competition. I mean, what is winning good? Is competition good? What do those things mean? How do you? The book is called Peak Performance, and that makes me think of outcomes and doing better. Right? So can you just talk a little bit about competition and winning? Are there ways to harness those constructs? Because I think that most people who are, I think you said driven, it's really hard to not feel in some way competitive either. First of all, we all, as a social psychologist, I think the first thing that you learn is that people are constantly socially comparing. Like, that is how we get a sense. It's really hard to be that zen that you're not doing that. I mean, how can you not? Right? The world is built around sort of rankings and
especially now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's hard for anyone to get out of that mindset. So is there a way to harness the ideas of competition and maybe even winning in a positive way, but still allow you to cultivate this kind of mindset you're talking about? That's not outcome focused. It may not be possible.
Asking the difficult questions, I see. You know, I tend to see, I think a lot of times it's very easy to get down on competing and rankings and stuff like that. And when you live in a sports world like that, that's all there is. Like, that's it. Like, did you run faster or slower? What pace did you get? Stuff like that. But, you know, when I look at competition, it can also bring out your best performances. Like, if I went down to a track and ran a mile right now, I wouldn't run that fast. But if you stuck me in a race, and you stuck me in a race where I really had to, like, care and stuff like that, like, my performance would improve a lot. So it can be a good thing, but I think, again, it depends on how you frame it. And mindsets are really hard to do, but, like, what we talk about is, it's about first trying to maximize, like, competing within yourself. So you're basing yourself against what is the best that I can do, and the best that I've done in the past, and saying this is what I'm going to focus on, and if I execute, like, my plan, my skills, my competition as best as I can, like, that gives me a chance. And what I always tell my athletes is, when you're looking at competing, is put yourself in place to do something good for yourself. Give yourself a shot. If it doesn't happen, it's fine. Like, we'll go back to the drawing board and we'll figure something out and do it again. But you've got to, like, use the competition to give yourself a shot.
Yeah, the only thing that I'd add is I like to think about competition in terms of competing together. So not necessarily against the other person, but you're competing to get the most out of yourself with other people. So it's very easy to see that in an athletic sense. Like Steve said, all of my best races, even as a slow amateur, have been when someone is pushing me and often beating me, but they're there next to me, I'm getting more out of myself. I think professionally, it gets a lot harder to have that mindset, particularly if you're in an organization where one person gets promoted and the other 3 don't. There is no easy answer. It's challenging. I think the best organizations, though, tend to be quite collaborative, and if they do compete, they have instilled a culture through artifacts, values, the stories that they tell, where people feel comfortable competing together. And again, I think none of this stuff's black and white, so it's not all compete together, but I like to think of it as, what's the primary motivation? And as long as the primary motivation is there, then hopefully the outcome is better.
I add one thing that I think is interesting. There's actually some research on sex differences in competition in sport that are really intriguing, and then they show up out on the track or playing field as well. Is that women do really well if they have a shot. So they can compete if they think they have a shot to win or hit their goal. If they don't, the effort and drive or the performance suffers more. And men will be delusional and think they have a shot when they don't, which might apply to more things than just athletics. But they will compete even if they don't have a shot. And what happens a lot of times then is they have bad performances when the competition is way too far out because they think they can do it. So I think what happens sometimes is you have to, what we do, especially on our men's and women's team, is frame goals differently. Is say, here's your goal for this race, or a goal for even in academics, your goal for this test, and make sure that goal fits for what their competitive drive is.
So one of the interesting findings about testosterone and cortisol, the sort of dominance hormone and the stress hormone, is that on teams, the team members who are seen as the best leaders by their teammates, and many of these studies were done actually with varsity women's teams at universities. The people who were seen as the best leaders by their teammates were the ones with the relatively higher testosterone and relatively lower cortisol. And they were not just seen as, they were seen as good leaders, not in the sense of the leader being out front and all of you are following me and I never turn around and look at you. They were seen as super collaborative and caring. So they were good at encouraging the younger teammates kind of at the bottom of the totem pole. They were good at encouraging them to keep it up even when they're struggling, and they were seen as the leadership qualities were really qualities that you would see as positive in any person. Do you feel do you see parallels? We're not always on teams, right? So often at work you are on teams, but do you see parallels for individuals? I mean, in individual sports, but also just when you're writing alone, you're not working with other people. Do you see some kind of, can you lead yourself well through the sort of the same qualities of being able to, these people are the people who are competitive in a sort of positive way, so they're able to, they approach, they don't avoid competition, they don't get thrown off by failure very easily. So you have this kind of low stress reactivity and pretty high resilience. Yeah, so I would assume you do see some of the same things, but how does it look for individuals in individual sports? It's not a very well-formed question.
So one of the most interesting things, both in the reporting for the book and then in just so much of the reporting that I've done, particularly at Outside Magazine, is that the best performers in individual sports, or what we might consider individual sports, don't think that they're an individual sport. So they talk about the tribe around them. So whether that is a training group, whether that's a coach, a physical therapist, a sports psychologist. So I don't know. I guess my answer is it's probably quite hard to do that on your own. So it's better to surround yourself with people to create that atmosphere that you get either way. Writing, part of the reason that teaming up to write this book was incredible was because we had that. And we still do. Today, like during the book launch, it's kind of stressful. And 1 minute, like Steve's like, you're checking your phone too much, put it down. And the next 2 hours later, I can give Steve that same tough love and good love and leadership. And I think it's very hard to lead yourself. It's not to say that people can't, but my current thinking on this, and who knows, maybe I'll change my mind, is that it's better to try to surround yourself with people that can help lead you.
About what?
He wins.
Good leadership.
All right. Can you tell us, and I want to emphasize that this is not just a book for athletes, but it's funny because, my book, I'm not an athlete. I was a professional ballet dancer, so there's a sort of parallel, but it's different in some ways. But I ended up, and I don't know much about sports at all. Like I did an interview with Golf Digest, I think it's Golf Digest. Maybe. But that's the magazine for golfing, right? So there we go. And she was interviewing me about sort of body language of after a golfer does well versus poorly, and how can you sort of adjust that. And I was like, well, when you have the thing and you hit the ball with the thing into the thing, and she ended up filling in the holes in this story, so it ended up looking okay in the interview. But I ended up, even though I know so little about sports, like using tons of sports examples, and part of it was because I got the Harvard coaches kept inviting me over to talk to them because they get this body-mind connection thing so much better than anyone else. Like so many people go, oh, I don't know, the body and the mind are separate, which seems ridiculous. Coaches totally get it. They're watching it every single day. They're not at all, they want to understand it better, but they're not skeptical that the mind and body sort of interact in both directions, or affect each other in both directions. It's really satisfying because they're paying attention to tiny little things. Like, for example, one of the basketball coaches, the women's basketball coach, was telling me that it really matters how the leader of the team behaves non-verbally after. So all of them see matches or games or races or whatever it is as a series of mini failures and wins. Right? It's not just a win. Like you're making mistakes and then you're having good moments. And what this coach was saying was that the leaders of the team, the body language of the leader matters so much. So if the leader, after I'm gonna get it wrong, like a free throw, if it doesn't go well, if they don't score, you see this like collapse in some of them, and others will do the opposite, sort of shoulders back. And she said that other players are watching that person so carefully. So sometimes she said the person who's the best athlete physically is not the person who I actually end up wanting at the top, because their behavior matters so much. So just an example, I do think sports communicate, make it so much easier for us to understand some of these dynamics. I mean, you can so easily see the parallels in real life, right? But I wonder if you could talk about, an experience in sport, whether you were the athlete or the coach, one of the experiences that most shaped kind of your worldview, your desire to write this book. Just talk about one of your most sort of memorable, meaningful moments in sport.
You can lead off there, Coach.
Oh, great. I got to think now. Man, one of my most memorable. Well, my memory's going to fail me now. But I think two things that actually happened very similar, are actually in the same race. Is I remember one of the first couple races when I was first coaching collegiate athletes. We were at a cross-country race that was 5 miles long, 8K for you guys, you UK guys. And I remember thinking everyone's ready to go, we're gonna do really well. And then they get out and the race starts and there's probably 90 to 100 people in there, and I run over to the 2 mile mark and I'm sitting there and the leaders go by, the rest of the people go by, everybody else in the world goes by. And then finally my whole team comes together and they're all together, but they're not anywhere near the front. And and I'm sitting there like yelling stuff at them, and they try and they move and they get done, and I'm like, what happened, guys? And I ask each one individually, and the fifth, we ran 7 people, and the 7th guy goes, well, Jim, our 6th guy, I normally am like right behind him, so I was just running behind him. And then the 6th place guy goes like, well, normally I'm like right around him, and I was running behind them. And it was like this ladder all the way until I get to the top guy, and the top guy's like, our normal number 1 fastest guy's like, I just felt bad. I was having a bad day. And because he was legitimately trying, he was just having an off day. But because, he was having an off day, the entire rest of the team just fell in line. And their expectations were just fell in line with like what he was doing, because no one wanted to pass anybody else because they had this pecking order going on. And I think that gets to your point too, is I learned a lot of lessons there, is that is people key off others. And that mind-body connection, the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th guy, I was like, well, did you feel bad at first? It's like, no, I felt pretty good. It's like, but then it started to hurt, after a while. So I thought I was good. But then I saw the finish line and kicked it in and realized I had a lot left. But they'd all convinced themselves that they were feeling worse than they were in the middle of the race, because they weren't supposed to be this close to our fastest guy. And like that lesson right there made me totally rethink a lot of things that I was doing, because here I was concerned about like, oh, I got to do these workouts to get these results and put them in the best physical condition, and the entire race like went because of this psychological mind-body connection that I didn't account for and didn't address.
Yeah, that's a good story. I can't top that. I don't know. So, just recently, a month ago, I ran a marathon, and my wife is just getting into running. She was doing the half marathon, and I had strained my hamstring 2 weeks before and did no running for 2 weeks heading into the marathon, which is not a great way to approach a marathon. Steve can tell you that. He told me that. Got to mile 10, and my hamstring started to go. Just like, I'm like, uh-oh, this is going to be bad. And at that point, was going to drop out of the race. But the course split off at mile 12. And I knew that my wife was behind me, and I didn't want her to see me on the side of the road, because we were like on a bike path. It's not like, I can go into a hotel or something. I didn't want her to see me on the side of the road, so I'm like, I've got to at least get to like the split off part, so she doesn't see me and get discouraged and then have a crappy day as a result. And I finished the race. Like, I ran 14 miles from there, and it wasn't as fast as I could have, but it was still, like, for me, a quite fast marathon. And it just goes, and this is something that we touch on in the book, but I guess I was like so kind of concerned, and at the time thinking like, oh, like I'm not going to reach my goal. I really wanted to run under 3 hours, and I knew when my hamstring went, like that wasn't in the cards. It's like, I'm not going to reach my goal, my leg is hurting, and it was very self-focused. And I swear, I was like, I'm going to sit on that curb, and I'm like, but crap, Caitlin might see me. And at that point, like, everything started to feel better. So I guess it's not direct mind-body, but in a sense, so.
I have a maybe sort of contentious question. And you might go, this is not relevant at all, okay? But one of the debates that my husband and I get in sometimes, and I should say I feel more strongly about it than he does. He's not necessarily saying what I think he's saying, but here's what happens. He likes we both love skiing, but he loves climbing and more sort of extreme outdoor stuff. And so one of the athletes he really loves is Alex Honnold.
I have no comment.
All right. But, okay, so, and and he's not necessarily, okay, here's the argument we get in. He'll want to watch a film, a documentary about a kind of extreme athlete who does
Dangerous.
Okay, but all right, before you judge, so I spent the year at the School of Public Health, And a lot of the people in my department are super fit. People tend to be fit in public health. And one of them, who's a runner, said, marathons are horrible for you. They're so unhealthy. No one should ever run a marathon. So marathon is not dangerous in the way that free climbing is, but maybe it's also unhealthy, right? So is doing these extreme things, I think part of why I react against these things is because I feel like we paint them as heroic. And I'm not, as a mom, I have a 15-year-old son, so when I see Alex Honnold, who looks like a kid, I think like, that's so awful for his parents and all the people who love him. and I don't see it as heroic, I see it as selfish. Right? There must be something in between when you're doing an extreme feat, sort of like, and a marathon is, for many people, the most extreme physical thing they'll ever do. Is it heroic, or are you your own hero? I mean, how do you reconcile things that may not actually be that healthy, but they may be gratifying in some other way? You might have some other kind of growth.
Loaded question. Loaded question. So the first thing that I would say is that the research for marathon running in particular, and we're both runners, shows all like epidemiology, large population studies show that runners have a lower mortality rate than the general population. And that's when they adjust for everything. The one study that had the opposite finding, they controlled for, you might know exactly, I want to say like BMI, blood pressure, resting heart rate. So they controlled for all the things that running like enhances, and then they said that runners have greater mortality from, I think it was arrhythmia or hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which is like heart muscle expands, or the wall around the heart, hardens. So one, I'd say that marathon running in particular tends to be like healthy if you define years in life. But where I was going with this is I think like, I often say like you can run to add years to life, but you can also run to like add life in those years. And I think there's something really nice about sport in particular, where you can set a goal that can just be a goal that you yourself care about, and you can progress in a way that is very tangible, and you can trace it completely back to yourself. And there are few other areas in life that allow for that kind of edification that I would say is very healthy. As far as the adventure athletes, like I don't have a good answer. I don't know. I watch Alex Honnold and I am like nauseated and in awe at the same time. I truly struggle to watch what he's doing, and I'm in complete awe, and I have to report on it, so I watch it. And it's not just me, like companies like Cliff Bar, I mean, they have to make really hard decisions about whether they want to sponsor these athletes. Are they setting a good example? I don't have the answer. Like that I can't answer.
Don't worry, I can't either. I think it's interesting because I think sometimes we need like some perspective on what these extreme athletes or even elite athletes do in normal sports. Alex Honnold, for instance, like I look at it and I'm like, that is insane, right? But he is the most well-trained person to do that standing on this earth, right? He is the best in the world at what he does. So while it is extremely difficult, it is something he is very well trained to do. And for him, it might be extremely challenging, like pushing his limits, but it's only just beyond his limits. You know, if any of us tried to do something like that, it would be far beyond our limits. And I think the same thing, like you look at running, like running a marathon is a big deal for a lot of people, and I get it. I've never run a marathon before, but I've spent weeks running, averaging 20 miles a day running. Where the next day, if I woke up, I could be like, oh, I'm going to go run a marathon. Big deal. But the reason is because like I was really well trained at that point, and it wasn't that big of a jump, so it didn't matter too much to me. And I think like there needs to be a better understanding of like where these athletes are coming from and how difficult it is for them. Because I think where we get unhealthy is when we try to do things that are much beyond our capabilities. And for some people, running a marathon quickly is much beyond their capabilities. And I see that all the time where people go like, I just ran my local 5K, I'm going to go run a marathon. No, that's probably not healthy. So it's all about where you are and where your capabilities are. I don't know how we get that message, but I think it's an important one to do.
I'm going to ask, well, one short question, and then we'll maybe share it with the audience who might have some questions. My quick question is, can I trick myself into fixing my ACL without getting surgery? Just kidding. Okay, so the real question is, you end with purpose, talking about purpose, and we talked a lot about how it's difficult to shift mindset. Can you give us a few takeaways about how to sort of understand? I mean, this is something we've been talking about for the last 4 days, my collaborators and I. How do you know what your purpose is? How do you sort of train that into yourself, right? And how does it affect your performance and I think your life more generally?
So I'll cover how it affects your performance, and then Brad can give the details on it. Is what we essentially found is that purpose is like the performance enhancer. Like, forget performance enhancing drugs and stuff like that. Like, find a purpose and you will. There's all sorts of stories and stuff. Is that the message we like to say is, like, anytime you see an athlete do something, or anybody do something incredible, whether it's like win the Super Bowl or catch the winning touchdown or like win the Boston Marathon, like they don't sit there and say, oh, I want to thank myself for all the training that I did. They thank someone who matters. Like, it's either, I want to thank my family, or I want to thank God, or something to that matter. And there's a reason for that. It's because when you have something that is beyond yourself, when you're not self-focused, like your governor on your brain for how far you can push essentially gets loosened. And there's actually some really good research in the exercise physiology world looking at race performances and looking at if you have like a purpose, if you have a reasoning, there's always more left in the muscle. Yes.
Yeah, so in terms of like how to find your purpose, I think that's tricky. In the book, and I want to give full credit, there's a researcher at the University of Michigan named Dr. Victor Strecker, who has studied this quite extensively, and we pull heavily on his research, so this is really his work, not ours. And he starts, I guess, like the journey to defining your purpose by really reflecting on what are your core values. And core values can be things like creativity, community, religion, spirituality, reputation, power, relationships. They span a pretty large swath. I think we have like 50 in the book, and I'm sure there are lists that are well beyond 50. And then picking those core values and forcing yourself to try to rank order them, and then after you rank order them, personalizing them. So what does creativity mean to you? What does the core value of relationships mean to you? And then from that, you can develop like this kind of North Star purpose statement, which I think is really helpful. What I have found helpful is once you have those core values, to try to ask yourself somewhat regularly, like, did I live in alignment with those core values? And I think that is one of the most powerful interventions that there is. So just at the end of the day, like, these are my 5 core values, or 4, or 3, or even 2. And these are what they mean to me. Did I live in alignment with those? And I think it's a really nice self-correcting mechanism, if you're not, to change course. And just to feel, like I had not been doing this until we started writing the book, and I started doing it, and subjectively I've just felt better since going through that exercise.
I mean, that is really similar to, I mean, I love Vic's work too, and he's a great guy. The sort of at the core of it is the simpler self-affirmation theory, which is just this exercise of, writing down what makes you who you are, which tends to be your core values, and then reflecting on that, writing about a time when you expressed it and why it matters to you, and even just simply doing that decreases your stress quite significantly, both your self-reported stress, your levels of epinephrine, your levels of cortisol, and improves your performance even in unrelated tasks. So, for example, Carnegie Mellon students in their second year, first semester, they were followed for a semester. They had either done the self-affirmation exercise or not. And then they tracked them through midterms and found that the ones who had done the self-affirmation exercise, even if their value was like, I care about art, art's really important to me, they did better in their midterm exams, their self-reported stress was lower, their epinephrine levels were lower. So I think you see parallels that are even simpler than that.
Yeah.
But the idea of blowing that out and really keeping yourself in check with that to me, it seems pretty clear from the research that that's going to have benefits across many, many different domains. Even increasing lifespan, decreasing all kinds of illness. So what I'd like to do, thank you.
Thank you.
And it's great to meet you guys in person. But I also want to share the space. If other people have questions, are you guys okay with answering other questions? Because I see a lot of note-taking here. Like, I think this is a very driven group. So, are there questions?
So I work with high school kids, and I work with high school kids, I'm a teacher as well. And I experience the pecking order thing all the time. And it is one of the most frustrating things to finish a race and you think everything's like built up, tapered to everything, like you think it's gonna be awesome, and everybody blows up. What do you do to correct it?
Yeah, so he said that he's a high school coach, experiences that pecking order thing that I said in the story where people won't move past someone who they perceive as better as. I'll give you the very running specific answer, okay? So sorry for anybody else. But maybe there's some lessons in here. What I do is I break that up in practice. And what I mean by that is when you're working out in practice, like you're gonna have the same pecking order because the top guys normally gonna always be the better person, like they're faster. That's how it works. But what I do is I rig the workouts by changing interval distances and things like that to make it where people who might not be able to run with them can. And then occasionally what I'll do is I'll like deceive people, okay? And yeah, I sound like a mean coach here, or a manipulative one. What I like to do is I'll pull someone aside and say, hey, like you might have eight 400-meter repeats, but on number 5, like if you go really fast, I'll give you number 6 off. And they'll be like, okay, sure, like I can do that. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm going to have this guy who might be our 5th best guy on number 5. He's going to go really fast, and everyone else in the group's going to be like, what? Like, I'm better than him. I should go with him. And then they won't know he's getting number 6 off. So it changes that pecking order a little bit. So, like, it sounds strange, but, like, little games like that, like, just mess with it and change it, and it seems to help.
My thing was, like, I like the way you talk about the analogies between stuff, but I'm kind of personally interested, particularly in the direct links. Like, what is it? What does sport do? Have you looked at that? Kind of what does sport do for performance and other aspects of life? Like, what's the relationship to direct thing?
So there's some research. It's not that extensive, but the research that is there shows that participation in sport, and I don't even want to use the word sport, but pushing yourself physically can have carryover benefits in other areas of your life, in particular around how one responds to stress and stressful situations. So the studies in this body of work, they tend to look at, I believe it's high school and undergraduate students, or maybe just undergraduate students, and they'll take a control group and just have them go about their life, and they'll take the experimental group and put them on an exercise routine, and then they'll measure, when exam time rolls around, they'll measure self-reported stress as well as some physiological measures of stress, and what they find is the group that was pushing themselves in the gym tends to respond better to the stress of exam and have less of a stress response. The kind of way that I like to frame it and what I've written is that I think that pushing yourself physically teaches you to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, which is not only beneficial when you're climbing or digging in a race, but it's beneficial in so many other areas of life. And my guess is that's what the science has shown, and if there's continued research, will show.
Yeah, and I think the one other area, although, you know, it's been a hot topic under debate, is like willpower and self-control. There's been some good research that shows like a direct transfer across those, and we actually use that with my athletes. Is we'll test it with various self-control things, or various like, I don't know, mental fatigue type things, like using like a psychological test, like a Stroop test or something like that in testing, and trying to improve on that, and then seeing how that translates over to running, and then doing vice versa. We run some really weird experiments on my college team, if you haven't noticed. But you see some positive transfer benefits going back and forth, even for things like, for example, pain tolerance. Even like we've looked at like tolerance in like an ice bath versus like tolerance of pain or effort running on the treadmill, and there's some pretty good direct transfer.
I actually asked the opposite question of that. So I was a competitive athlete in college, retired, essentially just like stopped doing that, and suffered kind of that like malaise of not knowing, like no longer living in a world that was like, you did this, therefore you are good, or that was bad, therefore you need to work harder. And that was a real struggle. So I see a book like this, and what I've liked from your newsletter and things like that is being able to take kind of like lessons like, oh, I remember that from when I was really competitive, and maybe like translating that to my regular life. So could you talk a little bit about, maybe the pitfalls of relying solely on like athletic performance indicators as a way to guide your life? Because the reality is that the world isn't oriented that way most of the time.
I'll take a first shot and then I'll let you go.
So that's a great question. I think that like transitions out of, and you rode in college, right? So good athletes especially, the transitions are always the hardest because so much of identity is poured into sport, and then like you said, so much of almost like self-worth and confidence is poured into sport. I think that coaches and parents in particular could do a better job from a very young age. Not necessarily diversifying. I mean, at a very young age, yes, diversifying, but like when you're rowing in college and you're trying to be the best rower you can be, like rowing is going to be a big part of your life. But I wish that there was more attention on the other life skills that you're building by rowing. It's easy though for me to say as like a writer. Steve lives it, so he can probably give a more informed answer.
Yeah, I mean, I had that experience. I mean, growing up in high school and college, like I self-identified, obviously, if you've been paying attention as a runner, and like that's all I saw. I didn't see anything else. Like I would never guess I would have written anything. So it's a really tough transition because you're like your entire identity is tied up in this one thing, and when it's taken away, it's almost like you go through this like depression, PTSD type effect. Like it's traumatic. And most of the times it happens coming out of college, and students aren't equipped with the psychological, mental skills or coping to like figure out where to go and how to apply that. And I know on my team what I tend to do is look at focusing on how to use those skills that we developed in sport and how to transfer those out over into any aspect in life. Like I bring a lot of former athletes back to talk about that transition in what they did. And one of my favorite ones was a college teammate of mine who was an All-American runner at Rice with me. And he's now an investment banker. And he always, in what he told my kids was like, well, the way I look at it is if I was running 7 days a week, twice a day in Houston, Texas, and could convince myself to do that for 4 years straight and do that grind, then all I have to do is take that same mindset to whatever I am doing in life. And that could be investment banking, it could be something else. What he said was, he's like, for those of you who have done that and committed to that, I know you can be successful at whatever you choose, and I have confidence in it if you realize and recognize that you can transfer over that skill and that ability. Because I think a lot of times what happens is we get siloed and we think like, oh, like I was a really good rower or runner or cyclist, and like we're never taught that any of those things transfer and those skill sets apply to more than that. We think, oh, how am I going to be, a doctor or whatever? None of this stuff matters that I learned, and it does, and we need to reinforce that message.
Just a quick story. My grad school advisor, Susan Fisk. I found out sort of later, used to include in her like recommendation letters about me that I had been a professional ballet dancer. And like when I found out, I asked her why, and she said, well, because you take rejection really well. Because, the ballet world is all about, like, you hardly ever get the role that you want. You are sort of getting rejected all the time. It's incredibly painful. And she said, yeah, you take journal rejections better than anyone I've ever known because you're used to that. And it was the first time that I was like, oh, that is transferable. That actually did sort of help me. But having a 15-year-old who's, does a lot of sports but isn't going to end up doing any sports professionally, I feel that as coaches are missing opportunities all the time to help build him as a person instead of just a soccer player or whatever it is he's doing. And it's really frustrating. I feel like it's the minority of coaches who are doing that kind of stuff, especially with kids. I mean, maybe in college you see, yeah, okay. All right, other questions, and I think maybe we'll wrap up then.
Yeah. So I just got the idea of peak performance. Quite often when athletes at their peak, you'll hear them or her say, I want to thank my family because of their sacrifices that I'm here. It's their stuff, and it might be their purpose, that's part of the reason they're doing it, but in that is there's kind of that other people have to make compromise and sacrifice in order for you to reach your peak. But everyday life doesn't work like that. You don't want to be at your peak at the sacrifice of people around you. So how do you find that balance, I guess, between being the best that you can be, but also helping the people around you to do that as well?
I mean, that is, it does apply outside sport too. Anything that people do that's a huge sort of accomplishment. I mean, don't people with the Academy Awards, they're thanking all the people who made sacrifices for them to get there.
All right. Yeah, I think it's real life in a lot of ways, and we talk about like balance a lot. And when you look at it is, it's almost having that freedom to choose, like how hard you want to go and how much you want to push it. Because like if you're the person trying to achieve whatever best you are, like there's going to be sacrifices, or there's going to be collateral damage almost, because it's like where you can only be spread so thin. And I think what we've looked at and what we've seen and what we're trying to get across is it's having the self-awareness to choose what that is. Because there's no way in the world that I can be, the best writer, the best runner, the best academic, the best all at the same time, and the best family member, right? It can't happen. So you essentially have to weigh in what those importance are and like figure that out. And I think sometimes we overuse the word sacrifices, because a lot of times, like, in my sport at least, people say like, oh, I sacrificed so much to like run. And it's like, no, you didn't sacrifice anything. You chose to do it, and you're gaining something if like you frame it correctly. And I think we should not always see it as like, oh, I sacrificed. No, like, if you're a good person, like you're bringing those people along with you. If you win the Academy Awards, like you better bet like your family is going to benefit in some way. It's just about choosing like what that way is and whether it's worth it or not.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add is like very few people that are at the world-class level, maybe hardly any, if any, and even people that are like kind of pushing their own personal envelope, I think it's hard to find someone that is like balanced in the traditional sense of like all the pieces just fit nicely. And I think there's a lot of pressure to like be balanced and find balance. And to Steve's point, I personally, particularly through writing this book, have come to think that like self-awareness is the actual skill or capability to develop, not balance. Because if you kind of start from a basis point that if I really want to push here, I'm going to have to sacrifice there, then like you're not in perfect balance. I think where people get into trouble is where they start pushing here and they lose the self-awareness and they don't realize what they're giving up as a result until later. And I think that's where people end up having regrets. So, yeah, I guess I'm just echoing what Steve said. Self-awareness is important.
Right. I think, well, first of all, please buy the book.
Yeah.
It's available here. And these guys are going to stick around to sign, to answer questions. So why don't we just mill about and chat?
Can I add really quick before
Yeah.
we all break? If you would like to buy the book, you're going to grab one up there at the table. Steve and Brad will stay up there to sign it, and then you're going to take it down to the front register right by where you came in, and that's where you'll pay for it. And same if you'd like to buy Amy's book as well.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
I don't know if I said this, but this is their book launch day,
Yeah.
right? So congratulations, because I know how much work and